Our Bible word is Zechariah 8 verses 20 to 21. Thus says the Lord of hosts, people shall yet come, inhabitants of many cities. The inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, let us continue to go and pray before the Lord, and seek the Lord of hosts. I myself will go also. So if you first look at the context of Zechariah. Now Zechariah himself, he was from a priestly family, so that means he himself was a priest. And the name of Zechariah means God remembered. And he was a very important figure in Jerusalem. And this was just after the period that the exile ended. So it was after 539 BC. He began his prophetic ministry in 520 BC while he was still a young man. And that we can read in Zechariah 2 verses 4. And Zechariah, like Haggai, another prophet, he was enthusiastic for the rebuilding of the temple. And because at the time of Zechariah and Haggai, the foundations were laid for the temple. But the temple wasn't built further, it wasn't completed. And there was also no priests worthy to officiate in the temple. So the people were disheartened. Why is our temple not there? Where are the priests? Because we were promised restoration. We've now returned from exile, and we are still here after all these years, and the temple hasn't been rebuilt, etc. And Haggai, he was a prophet who encouraged the people, let's now work on this temple further. And Zechariah then came after him and he encouraged the completion for the rebuilding of the temple. If we look further into the historical context of this time period, like I said, this was after the time of the Babylonian exile that ended in 539 BC. And of course the Babylonians, they had an empire, and then the Persian kings like Cyrus, he came along and they defeated the Babylonians. And in 538 BC, Cyrus, he gave an edict that allowed the temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. And that we can also go read there in Ezra. And first of all, there was Sheshbazzar. He was the first provincial governor appointed by the Persians. And he attempted to rebuild this temple, but without success. But then the Persians appointed the second governor, that's Zerubbabel. That was in 520 BC. And also interestingly, he was actually a descendant of David's royal household. And Governor Zerubbabel, he was also supported in this by Joshua, the high priest. And so under their time period, the economic situation, etc., improved somewhat, and they initiated the building of the completion of the temple. And of course, there also to help along were the two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. And Haggai, he made his first speech on 29 August 520. And then clearing up work began 24 days later. And on 18 December 520 BC, the foundation stone was ceremoniously laid. And Haggai, he addressed the people. And after that, we don't hear anything about him. But Haggai, he encouraged now, okay, the foundation stones are there, let's work now. And he gave the speech in 520 BC, also when this foundation stone was laid. Then after him, Zechariah came, and he continued this proclamation. Let's build the temple. And the first 8 chapters are significant here. And because it actually consists of 3 central messages that Zechariah gave. And the first message, that can actually be dated, dates to about October, November 520 BC. He gave a second message, which can be dated to 15 February in 519 BC. And then the third message he gave in the 4th year of the reign of that king at that time, that we can date it to 7 December 518 BC. And Zechariah, he sees the second governor now, Zerubbabel, that he will become a worldwide ruler. And of course, Zerubbabel, his name actually means branch of Babylon. But Zechariah sees him that he will be a future ruler of the world. And also that the high priest, Joshua, will be made equal in rank with him. So he sees a future time period when there will be these two main figures who will have universal rule, so to speak. Zerubbabel, he will become like a king, and then assisted by Joshua, the high priest. So Zechariah and Haggai, their principal mission was successful because they encouraged the rebuilding of the temple, and that was achieved successfully. The temple was eventually rebuilt and consecrated in 515 BC. So the mission of Zechariah and Haggai was successful. The other portions of Zechariah's prophecy, however, that did not happen, because they saw that this temple, or Zechariah specifically saw that this temple being rebuilt, it would be the center of worldwide salvation. And there's Zerubbabel, he will be king, and Joshua will be the high priest, and they will be in charge of a worldwide order of peace and security. And Zechariah also criticized Cyrus because for political instability, for warfare, and he said his reign won't last much longer, but that also did not come to pass. Cyrus remained. Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest, they did not acquire this or get this universal rule and this order of peace. But what is significant of Zechariah is his worldwide vision of salvation. For him, it's not just about Israel. It's all peoples will eventually come to Jerusalem, and they will come and worship God at Jerusalem. And it will be all-inclusive. And here we find the seeds of the language we find in the New Testament. Because there Jesus, he's the true king. And he's also the high priest. And he will establish this worldwide order of peace. This new Jerusalem people will flock to, as we also read at the end of the book of Revelation. And this new Jerusalem that will descend from above. This worldwide pilgrimage, an order of peace and righteousness, it will be established. So, but here in Zechariah, it's there, but it refers to something else. So we see how that message here of the prophet Zechariah was also developed in the New Testament. So it does not refer to Jerusalem, the city itself, but there's a new Jerusalem that will come from above that will replace the existing order. But that's Zechariah, and that's Haggai. It was about, let's build a temple, let's finish it, let's complete this work. And eventually the temple was completed and consecrated in 515 BC. If we focus now on our textual unit, what concerns us here is that third message of Zechariah, and that's chapter 7 verse 1 to chapter 8 verses 23. And that can be dated to 7 December 518 BC. And what happens here is that people from Bethel, they sent a delegation to Jerusalem. So they asked if they must continue the practice of mourning during the 5th month. That's to commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was destroyed in the 5th month in 586 BC. So they sent a delegation. Must we continue with mourning? It also includes fasting. You know, because we're back in our land. We've returned from exile. And so must we continue with this? So God responds to this delegation through the prophet saying, you did all these fasts. You did it for me, God says. God says, no, you didn't do it for me. So God says to them, your worship is insincere. It's filled with hypocrisy. And this is a response that God gives through Zechariah. If we go to chapter 7, verses 8, then the word of the Lord came to Zechariah, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, execute true justice, show mercy and compassion, everyone to his brother. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the alien or the poor. Let none of you plan evil in his heart against his brother. So God says here, this is more important. Your conduct must be righteous. If that's not in place, your fasts and whatever other acts of worship you do is meaningless. So first get this right. Do acts of righteousness, etc. And then God says, it was for this reason that you were scattered. That your forefathers, because they didn't listen to me, they were disobedient. They oppressed the poor, the widow, the orphan. They were unrighteous. That's why they were scattered. That's why they went into exile. So do not be like them. And God then also promises that, but that will not continue forever, because He also promises there will be a return of this exile, because that is already taking place already here at the time of Zechariah. And God, in chapter 8 of Zechariah, He speaks of this future glory of Jerusalem. How Jerusalem will be restored. And if we go to chapter 8 verses 1, this is now what God promises them. Again the word of the Lord of hosts came, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, I am zealous for Zion with great zeal. With great fervor I am zealous for her. Thus says the Lord, I will return to Zion and dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Jerusalem shall be called the city of truth, the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. So God is saying here, He will restore Jerusalem. And He speaks there of the children will again play in the streets, and there will be their laughter and playing will be there, and it will be heard by the old men, etc., sitting in the city. And also the restoration might appear to be too amazing. They can't believe it. But God also says, nothing will be too amazing for me. He will bring the exiles back. There will be abundant crops and abundant harvests. And where the people of the Jews, they were a curse among the nations. In other words, it's normally if you curse your enemy, you will say, let things happen to you like what happened to Israel. In other words, they were destroyed. That will be removed, God says. Now they will become a blessing. In other words, people will say, let good things happen to you like it happened to Israel or Jerusalem. Because they were again blessed by God. So in that way, they will become a blessing. So God will restore Jerusalem. His favor again will be upon her. But He also expected people to live righteously. If we go to chapter 8, verses 16 to 17, again God says, These are the things you shall do. Speak each man the truth to his neighbor. Give judgment in your gates for truth, justice, and peace. Let none of you think evil in your heart against your neighbor. And do not love a false oath, for these are things that I hate, says the Lord. So part and parcel of this restoration of Jerusalem is also acts of righteousness. That the people come right in their behavior. That's part and parcel of Jerusalem's restoration. And then God also says that your mourning, in other words, and also your fasting, it actually be turned into feasts of joy. In other words, instead of mourning and fasting, you will feast. You will eat a lot. And that's what God says there from verse 18 and 19 onwards. There will be great feasts that will be enjoyed instead of mourning. Of course, great feasts accompanies righteous action. And then God also says Jerusalem will be a place where everybody will come to worship. Again, if we read our Bible word there in verses 20 to 21. Thus says the Lord of hosts, people shall yet come, inhabitants of many cities. The inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, Let us continue to go and pray before the Lord, and seek the Lord of hosts. I myself will go also. So people will willingly seek the Lord. But not just Israelites or the Jewish people. Also the Gentiles, those from faraway lands. They will come with the Jewish people to Jerusalem to go on pilgrimage. If we go to the next verse, it says there, yes, many peoples and strong nations shall come to seek the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem and to pray before the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days 10 men from every language of the nations shall grasp the sleeve of a Jewish man, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. So this is Zechariah. He's encouraging people to complete the building of the temple. But also part and parcel of this building of the temple is his message of this restoration of Jerusalem, but accompanied by righteous conduct and actions of God's people. And also that there will be this pilgrimage of people, not just Jews, various nations, that they will come to Jerusalem. They will worship God in Jerusalem. Of course, this vision was not fulfilled in the time of Zechariah, but it prefigures the New Testament and the New Testament hope of the New Jerusalem, where all nations will also come on pilgrimage to God, to have fellowship with God, in the Jerusalem that comes from above.